Colonialism never ended, it simply evolved. Historically, colonialism involved the capture of land and labor. Between 1800 and 1875, on average, 215,000 square kilometers were added as colonies every year, or approximately one Guyana. Between 1875 and 1945, 620,000 square kilometers were added as colonies each year, or approximately one Ukraine. By 1945, 1 in 3 people lived under colonial rule. In the decades following World War II, despite the waves of independence, we are still dealing with the consequences of colonialism. It has taken on many forms over its time span, from exploitation colonialism to settler colonialism. In their book Data Grab, The New Colonialism of Big Tech and How to Fight Back, which you absolutely should read, sociologists Ulises Mejias and Couldry explore one of colonialism's latest forms, data colonialism, which captures not land, but data, and has quietly grown to threaten new dimensions of our lives and futures. Just to be clear, we're not saying that today's digital wars are equivalent to the brutality of colonial life in previous centuries. That would be absurd. Land and data are two very different types of assets. Rather, the framework of colonialism makes it possible for us to understand our current digital lives and power relations with the corporations that define them, including how those power relations came to be and continue to exist. Data colonialism is a social order in which the continuous extraction of data from our lives generates massive wealth for the few and suffering for the many on a global scale. This process is extensive in its appropriation of human life, as it captures and monetizes nearly everything about the way we live, move, consume, and converse, with worrying implications on education, healthcare, housing, agriculture, policing, and more. With 3 in 8 people using Facebook and 1 in 8 people using TikTok, with 329 million terabytes of data harvested per day, and projections for 2025 estimating 181 zettabytes of data being gathered, the conquistadors of the cloud are pillaging nearly everywhere and everyone. This isn't to condemn the mere concept of collecting data. That would be as absurd as condemning the telegraph for the role it played in British colonialism, or condemning modern medicine because many of its earliest breakthroughs were appropriated from indigenous peoples. Data is not bad in and of itself. We need data about the world around us, how it affects us, and how we affect it, so that we can understand and change for the better. The issue is really how data is extracted, from what, from whom, and on what terms. When data is merely a tool for generating profit in the hands of corporations, that's when we have to stand up and challenge those terms and conditions. Data colonialism is not separate from other forms of colonialism. It is an evolution, a continuation of their compounding effects. By understanding the meaning and consequences of data colonialism, along with the civilizing mission used to justify it, we can determine ways to resist its rule and decolonize data for a better tomorrow. Like other forms of colonialism, data colonialism is deeply intertwined with capitalism. Far from being separate stages in some teleological process, capitalism cannot be understood without its connection to colonialism. The wealth generated in the colonies financed the factories. It enriched and empowered Europe's proto-capitalists and innovated methods of rational management that would be taken from the plantation grounds to the factory floor. The divisions of our capitalist world cannot be properly contextualized without a colonial framework, and by understanding that connection, we can recognize the resemblance between the land grabs of the past and the data grabs of today. Colonialism and capitalism are continuously mutating and adapting, though their core mission remains the same. Of course, colonialism will look different today because the kind of violence it establishes in the first place set up the social relations that enable it to continue through less overt and more symbolic forms of violence. As Mejias and Couldry put it, your dispossession, your loss of control over the data that affects you, and the impact that this has on your ability to control the terms on which you work, get loans, educate your children, and so on, may be no less absolute, but no violence is needed to persuade you to click the box that says, "I agree to the terms and conditions," before installing an app. That click alone, by virtue of the vast legal and practical infrastructure of capitalist social relations, is enough to plunge us into endless spirals of data extraction. In other words, today's forms of extraction are almost frictionless, although that doesn't mean their long-term repercussions are entirely non-violent. Despite being an ardent decolonialist, one of the video game genres I used to enjoy the most was the 4X subgenre of strategy games. I spent many hours in my youth playing Civilization 5 and later Civilization 6. A few years ago, I quite enjoyed playing Humankind. I was never particularly good at these games, mind you, but they were certainly designed to help you grasp and internalize the 4 X's of colonialism: explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Historical colonizers explored to find places to control, expanded their holdings by force to appropriate labor and resources, exploited the colonies for all the wealth they could squeeze, and exterminated any opposition through direct violence or indirectly, through the suffocation of social and economic alternatives to colonial life. Data colonizers also explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Rather than exploring land, with the rise of internet use, data colonizers establish and explore data territories, also known as platforms like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, where interactions can be mediated and harvested. Within such territories, the innocuously named cookies have become one of the most powerful means of capturing massive amounts of data about internet users. Data colonizers further seek to expand computers into every interaction and expand the platforms and connections between platforms to gather even more data. Everything from your phone, to your vacuum, to your fridge, to your doorbell, to your watch can now gather data about your habits, interactions, opinions, and spaces. Data grabs are taking place in the data territories of agriculture, education, health, and especially work. John Deere tracks its tractors. Google Classroom and other edutech services are expanded into more classrooms and doing who knows what with the data. Fitbit information is being fed to insurance companies. Surveillance, while always being part of capitalist management, has expanded significantly within workplaces, punishing desperate gig workers with lower wages, keeping warehouse workers scanning continuously, and tracking every office worker's keystroke. Of course, simply having the data is not enough. Data colonizers must exploit that data. Google's vast data territory is among the most lucrative sites for exploitation. They have pioneered, colonial language very much intended, new ways to sell ads using previously untapped swaths of data. Data colonizers convert data into wealth and power through targeted advertising, user manipulation, and predictive, often discriminatory algorithms. Finally, data colonizers exterminate, not through physical violence, but symbolic and systemic violence, by eradicating alternative ways of thinking and being, and by creating monopolies that are so powerful that they shape the course of genocides and health crises. Data colonialism shares 6 distinct similarities with colonialism's past and present. First, it is also founded in the appropriation of resources, with the shared mindset regarding that appropriation that the resources are cheap and unbound from ethical or environmental considerations. The spice must flow. Historical colonialism's focus was on appropriating land, as the savages weren't using it properly, and labor, as the savages were predestined to servitude. But data colonialism is focused on appropriating human life in the form of data, as clearly every detail of our lives exists to maximize shareholder value. In any case, it's free real estate, and unlike land, data is a non-rival good, so it's ripe for exploitation by multiple parties at once. The second similarity is that the appropriation serves to build a new social and economic order that benefits the colonizer, whether Britain or big tech. The default position is now to extract data from whatever people do, no matter how trivial. Platforms and apps organized around the collection and exploitation of data are now the near inescapable infrastructure of daily life. Third, colonialism continues to be a private state partnership. It was never solely the domain of church and crown. Chartered companies and enterprises have always played a role. Today, various players in the data extraction game form what Mejias and Couldry call the social quantification sector. Opaque and utterly unaccountable companies like Palantir quietly work hand in hand with governments to maintain smart borders and predictive policing that terrorize vulnerable populations. The more famous Big Five of Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon are just as collaborative with the state and carry on colonial legacies of dispossession and injustice. Data harvesters and data aggregators, large and small, have coalesced into a parallel of the old colonial administrations. As a few thousand coders, designers, managers, and marketers control the lives of billions. Fourth, both forms of colonialism devastate the physical environment. Historical colonialism set the precedent for the natural world being viewed as cheap and ripe for large-scale extraction, while today's data colonialism continues to devour precious minerals, energy, and water to sustain itself, expanding its data centers across lands in the global north and south, while expelling metric tons of carbon with every Amazon package delivered, Bitcoin verified, or satellite launched. Fifth, all forms of colonialism generate deep inequalities between colonizers and colonized, exploiters and exploited. On its face, data colonialism may not seem as physically violent as historical colonialism, but it certainly creates asymmetric data relations that deepen existing inequalities of class, race, gender, and more that affect people's ability to live, and it relies on the continued exploitation of historically colonized people to mine its much-needed materials, thus enabling systemic violence. Furthermore, these data relations are absent of physical limitations in size, connectivity, depth, and transferability, thus opening up new forms of colonial power and control. Sixth, historical colonialism was justified with the civilizing mission or white man's burden of evangelizing Christianity and a certain racial, scientific, and economic superiority. These days, such narratives have been thoroughly discredited, so data colonizers have turned to new justifications. Data colonizers speak of ushering in the inevitable progress of a new machine age or fourth industrial revolution and extol the convenience and connection that their extraction enables. When you put it that way, why would anyone oppose convenience and connection? When cloud storage and WhatsApp groups make it easier than ever to save and share, why resist? And this is precisely how big tech wants us to see things. They're not calling out the costs of our convenience. They're not bringing attention to the asymmetric relations that our data empowers. They won't raise the alarm on the new forms of exploitation that the extraction brings, especially when it impacts the workers or contractors and not the end users. They'll sell you convenient solutions to the problems they create, if you can afford that convenience, of course, and you'll have to accept it because you're not able to opt out without significant consequences once these platforms have accrued enough power. When they become the social operating system, you kinda have to click I agree. But hey, at least it's convenient, right? Don't even get me started on the convenience offered to the global south, when a combination of these countries' weak infrastructure and tech corporations' massive resources has enabled the continuation of our dependence on the global north. How can we ever gain our independence and truly decolonize when we're reliant on the external provision of WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram to facilitate our day-to-day existence? We should really be asking if the only form that convenience can take just so happens to coincide with the extractive ambitions of tech conglomerates. These companies also love to sell us on connection. But do we as a social species need social media companies to connect when we've been connected on small and large scales for tens of thousands of years? Obviously, as a writer who has chosen to distribute my work on social media, I can recognize that such platforms offer some value. I know that they've empowered political mobilization for better and for worse, but they also make it easier to surveil and suppress dissent. While echo chambers aren't nearly as common as is commonly believed, since being exposed to dissenting opinions is what keeps people hooked online, radicalization has certainly proliferated thanks to the profits over facts model of social media. Fractures have long existed in our society, but social media certainly enhances those fractures. Meta wants us to believe that it represents the inevitable progress of human connection. But I'm sorry, how could a safe global community ever be created from the exploitative, profit-driven model of Meta? Why should we accept their implicit claim that continuous data extraction is necessary for the human community to flourish? Don't we deserve to connect in ways that aren't dictated by their business model and disconnected from reality? But perhaps I'm asking too many questions. Maybe I just need to connect my toilet to the grid so that Amazon has a continuous reading of my stool samples for targeted probiotic advertising. Maybe I should digitally bind every inch of my home to the global data colony. Maybe I should just hush them out and plug into the Internet of Things. I've been told that my data, in combination with that of countless others, has enabled the development of artificial intelligence, which as we all know is way smarter than any of us. Or is it? As it turns out, the hype train of AI is simply a parade in praise of an overglorified pattern-recognizing parrot that replicates the racial and gendered biases of its massive datasets and still needs to be taught and corrected constantly. AI serves as a convenient cop-out for folks who don't want to challenge inequality and would rather give it a neutral face while relying on marginalized folks globally to actually teach the computer what to do. Even the efforts to counteract these concerns with AI ethics boards fall flat because their ethics codes are uselessly abstract, isolated from the levers of power, and thus utterly toothless. Particularly when these boards get their checks cut by the very same corporations they're supposed to be regulating. There may be some real scientific value in AI for sure, but much of it is just marketing and party tricks. It might get really good at detecting cancer, but it shouldn't be clogging the internet with SEO optimized slop, and it certainly shouldn't be deciding the fate of real people. Whether it's Europe bringing progress and salvation to the savages, or Facebook graciously running internet infrastructure in over 30 African countries, colonialism often excuses itself with virtuous, civilizing missions that serve to justify or erase the reality of their exploitation. Alternatively, following the shock doctrine, data colonizers use crises like the pandemic as an excuse to expand the territories of data extraction. In any case, they need these alibis to distract us from the truth and capture the social imagination so fully that we can't even consider that there are alternative means of convenience and connection. Just click, I agree. Or don't. Maybe it's time to unaccept these terms and conditions. It won't be easy. Colonialism's past and present love to make us feel as though their power is incontestable. There's a lot of deception, exploitation, and coercion that gets us to accept this way of the world. But that doesn't mean we're completely helpless. With the mental health impacts of big tech, the ongoing loss of workers' rights, the ever-growing authority of algorithms, the manipulation of populations for commercial and political purposes, the rising threat of disinformation and hate speech, and the decimation of environments by data centers, the threat of data colonialism seems insurmountable. Yet data colonialism can be resisted. Once we identify our shared interests, build concrete solidarity, and develop our understanding of these issues. Activists have been organizing against the collaboration of tech companies with the Israeli apartheid system and with America's ICE agency. Indigenous communities have been fighting for and establishing data sovereignty and control over their languages. Workers in the tech industry and the gig economy have been forming unions to represent their shared interests. Citizens have sought the banning of facial recognition and predictive policing technology in certain areas. None of these are enough, of course, but in this case, they're certainly better than posing no resistance whatsoever. There won't be an easy fix or a simple answer. Though not completely useless, regulation alone will never be enough, as the state will never challenge the principle of extraction it relies upon. No single legislation, or technology, or movement will solve everything, but we all have the capacity to affect change, big and small. If you're familiar with my work, you'll know that I've been advocating for a three-pronged approach to any sort of social revolution. We need acts of confrontation, non-cooperation, and prefiguration to see the transformations we seek come to fruition. To confront data colonizers with protest, obstruction, and sabotage. To refuse cooperation as workers within the social quantification sector and consumers of those technologies through strikes and boycotts wherever possible. And to prefigure a different approach to data, we must imagine a different worldview on data altogether by cultivating critical thinking, developing alternative, non-extractive and collaboratively controlled platforms, and supporting initiatives that seek new ways of gathering and using data for good. Through social, political, environmental, cultural, and educational solutions that respect the principle of free association, we can dismantle the extractivist models for collecting data, reject the profit-driven view of our lives as territories ripe for dispossession, and turn data into a collectively owned tool for transforming the world in positive ways. In other words, we can decolonize data and create a world where many worlds can fit. In our personal lives, we can reclaim our space and time by disengaging from as many of the profit-driven, data-extracting and attention-consuming technologies as possible, and re-engaging with nature, with each other, and with ourselves, so that we have the mental space to even imagine another way of living. As American philosopher Alan W. Wood wrote in his exploration of Hegel's ethical thought, surely the most wretched unfreedom of all would be to lose the ability even to conceive of what it would be like to have the freedom we lack, and so dismiss even the aspiration to freedom as something wicked and dangerous. So let's imagine a convivial way of living, to borrow the term from Austrian philosopher Ivan Illich, one that limits our technologies so that they serve us and facilitate our interdependence instead of isolating and dominating us for the benefit of data colonizing authorities. It's time to reject the terms and conditions. All power to all the people. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow peoples. Thanks to the seedlings, the saplings, and especially the roots for making all of this possible. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/sainttrue. Check out my other videos for a range of radical topics. Thanks again. Peace.